Hey there, welcome, and thanks for joining us for our Global Data Vault September webinar. I am Trista Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault, and we are kicking off the next episode in our Back to the Basics series. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is what might be considered a totally different dialect, and it is the Veeam vocabulary. So whether you're new to Veeam or not, hopefully we're going to offer you a deeper understanding of some of the more common Veeam terminology. And if you have any questions at all at any point, go ahead and put them in chat and we'll make sure that we address those at the end, if not along the way. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our team today. Our real speakers for today are Kelly Caldwell, our Service Delivery Manager, and Stephen New, who's the Senior Support Manager for Global Data Vault. So with that, let me untie my tongue and pass it over to Kelly to get us started.
Thanks, Prispa. We're happy to be here, Phila. We can all work through that, right? So, today we're talking about not so much what is Veeam, but what are all of the words associated with Veeam. Within the backup and disaster recovery industry, a lot of the terms are reused, multi-purpose, that type of thing. So we wanted to take a little bit of time to explain what Veeam-specific terminology is and how Veeam uses some of those common terms to fulfill its needs with the products to complete the backup as a service, DR as a service functionality. So we'll look at some of the commonly used vocabulary there. Stephen's going to do most of the talking here. He's our resident Veeam expert, these terms as we go through them. So let's get started. We all know what Veeam is, right? It's software. Veeam is a company who created a product called Veeam Backup and Replication. Everything that we discuss today is primarily going to revolve around that product. It was designed as a method to protect virtual machines. Back in the day, the slogan was built for virtualization. They've since evolved to cover physical servers, endpoints, different hypervisors. The product's come a long way, and as we add features, we're going to add new vocabulary, new terms, things like that. So we wanted to see what kind of differences we have there. The basic components of Veeam, out of the box, when you download it, install it, it's going to install a certain set of products, a certain set of things. With every install, you're going to have a SQL server. It's going to be a small, light version. It's not full-blown SQL. That's where you're going to have your data, your history, settings, etc. You're going to have your console, which is where you do all of your management of jobs and restores and whatnot. The repository, and we'll hear that term multiple times today, but the repository is just simply a place where you store your backups. Right? It can be a folder on an existing server. It can be a set of drives, NAS, SAN. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then the proxies are sort of the data movers, the traffic cops, if you will. They have a couple of different roles that they play, and we'll address them. So, Stephen, let's talk about data movers, transport services, bottleneck detectors, because we're getting a little bit more advanced with our terminology here.
The actual proxies are actually going to act as data movers in the transports. They have different transport modes. So we'll get into transport modes a little bit later. So the actual data movers and the transport services and/or modes are actually part of the proxy, which is one of the basic components that gets installed with Veeam. What the proxy does is it communicates with the hypervisor and also back to the repository. So also the bottleneck detector, this is going to be a very valuable resource whenever you are having issues with, let's say, maybe slow transfer speeds. What it will do is it'll take the weakest link in the backup path. What I mean by that is it will detect the slowest component, whether it be network, source, target, proxy. It will let you know one of those four items, which is the slowest point in the chain. They will all give you a percent, but normally the bottleneck is the one with the highest percent.
That's pretty cool because, back in the day, we used to scratch our heads and wonder where the problems were, and you add resources here, add resources there, and hope it would just fix it, right?
Yeah. Before the bottleneck detector, you would actually have to go diving through the logs to find out where the actual bottleneck was. So adding the bottleneck detector, that's a big advantage in helping us troubleshoot where the issue could be.
All right. So the components of that product, backup and replication, I mentioned. Obviously, we're going to have backup and replication. Stephen, why don't you walk us through these?
So the components of Veeam is going to be obviously a backup, and these can be application consistent or image level backups. What I mean by application consistent is it does have the ability to enable guest processing, which will actually trigger a VSS or a volume shadow services snapshot which will actually QS any databases that you may have, Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint, stuff like that. Backup repository is going to be your storage location. So whether you have it going to a local path on the backup server, or if you have it going to a dedupe storage appliance, every single instance is going to have a backup repository, and that is where Veeam is going to keep the files that it actually creates during the run. The replication portion, it creates a fully hydrated copy of the virtual machine in a power off state. What we mean by that is whenever we run a replication job, it creates a snapshot from your hypervisor. It uses Veeam as a transport, and then it transports it to a hypervisor on the global data vault side in a powered off state. So if you were ever to need to fail over, let's say you lose one server, just go ahead and fail over now, but we'll get into the more specific details of that here a little bit later. Also, the restore points, these are, now I'm starting to get the tongue twister there. These are going to be the point in time when backups have to run and when you can recover to. So let's say your first job run will create a VBK or a base image, and then each point in time will have a timestamp on when the job runs. So each of the files will have a timestamp, which are restore points.
Yeah, and I guess it's important to note, as we talk about repositories and whatnot, is that Veeam is hardware agnostic. You know, they don't have an appliance. They don't have any hardware. They're not tied to any specific type of hardware. So you can use one type, any combination of types. You know, whatever you have in your data center will work sufficiently. You don't have to buy a specific thing for it.
The failover process, what that is, we just discussed replication as creating a snapshot using Veeam as a pass-through, storing the snapshot on the global data vault side in a hypervisor here on our side, and that's stored in a power off state. So what a failover is that's the process of actually switching the production B server. Let's say that you lose one server in your infrastructure. You would just right click on the replica, and then you would choose failover now. And what that does is it powers on the replica on the global data vault side. It powers on the replica on the NEA on the customer side. And it'll power on an NEA, which is a network extension appliance on the GDV side. And then it will establish a VPN tunnel. And then once that tunnel is established, then the server will be up and completely communicate down from the global data vault side back to the servers in the customer's infrastructure. So the failback is the process of synchronizing the data back from the global data vault side to the primary data location. Let's say that you did have that one server go down, and you did perform a failover now in your Veeam backup and replication console. So what a failback is you have the option to fail back to production, which what that will do is that will actually take a snapshot on the global data vault side, and then it will actually send that snapshot down to the customer side, and then it'll merge that snapshot back into the production VM. So if the VM is completely gone, what that does is that creates a new VM on the customer side with the same name, and then it will automatically send the snapshot or checkpoint back down to the customer side and automatically create the VMDK, VHDXs, any of the virtual files. And then once it recreates it, it will automatically remove the old server back from the replica job, and then the new one will be added.
What you're saying is, if with replication, if the virtual machine still exists, then we're only going to send the changes back that have happened since the failover. And if it doesn't, it's smart enough to know, and it'll just create a whole new VM.
That is correct. The seeding portion is actually normally what we primarily use for replication data. What I mean by that is that we already have your cloud backups on the global data vault side. There's no point in sending the data to us twice. So we have an option in the replication job to use the replication seeding option. And then we can actually go in and specify your cloud repository on the global data vault side. And what it will do is it will actually seed your replicas from the Cloud Connect data on the global data vault side, instead of sending that data over the internet twice. So essentially, you would send it once, we would seed it to the replica, and then we would just point it at, we would map it to the data it creates here at Global Data Vault.
And so we just get the changes that have happened since that backup and whatever's live on the VM.
Correct. The initial seeding process, it will make the replica on the Global Data Vault side, and then after we map it, it will pull up any changes.
All right, so you talked about the NEA. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. So what the NEA does is it creates an SSB VPN tunnel. NEA is Network Extension Appliance. And what that does is that allows the customer to connect a virtual machine to the Global Data Vault's server here in our side through a secure connection, which is all initiated through Veeam. So what happens is when we create a hardware plan, we automatically deploy the network extension appliances for replication on the customer side and also the Global Data Vault side. And just like the VM, these stay in a powered off state. And these are only powered on when the customer initiates a failover from the Veeam console on their side.
How about backup copy jobs? We talk about the 3-2-1 rule, and Trista mentioned, the availability gap. And availability gap is basically what you expect your backup product to deliver and what you actually get. But anytime you follow the 3-2-1 rule, you're going to have best practices in place. So how do we enact that with something like a backup copy job?
I'm going to go ahead and answer both of these questions within the same answer, basically. So the way that we actually do this is Global Data Vault always follows Veeam's best practices, which we keep 3 copies of your data, and then we keep 2 backup copies on 2 different types of media, 1 offsite. What that means is we will actually create a backup copy that's called a local copy on the Veeam server, and then we will make a copy of the main or the primary backup job and store that in the local copy destination. It could be on the same system. It could be on a different system that's mapped through a CIF share or an SMB share, or it could be a copy, which we always send a copy offsite. So it could be the copy that is sent offsite to Global Data Vault. That is actually a backup copy job that we create, and then we just store it in the cloud repository on the Global Data Vault slide.
Let's talk a little bit more. You've mentioned the production, the backup repository, cloud repositories, and proxies. Can you sort of tell us if there was a path of a backup, what would that look like?
So the path of the backup is initiated through the Veeam Backup and Replication console. And then what it does is it sends an API or a PowerShell direct call to the hypervisor. And then the hypervisor is responsible for taking a snapshot or a checkpoint. And then once that checkpoint or snapshot gets taken, it initiates the proxy to do the transfer from the checkpoint or the snapshot. And during the transfer is when the actual deduplication and compression takes place by the proxy. And then the proxy will also determine the best mode that you have available. So it will automatically choose the modes depending on what transport types are available. NBD or network device mode or network mode is what it is called, will always be the last point that it would choose. So it would try to use virtual appliance, hot add, or direct stand. And if any of those are not available, then it would automatically fill over to the NBD mode. But the flow of the backup is it takes the snapshot, the proxy dedupes, compresses it, sends it to the backup repository. Once it's on the backup repository, then it sends a commit or basically a message back to the hypervisor saying the backup is done and initiates another call to remove the snapshot.
Cool. And then at that point, we use the backup copy job to pull that up to our cloud repository.
Correct. We use that to store a copy locally and also to store a copy up in the Global Data Vault cloud.
So if my connection is slow, what about WAN accelerators?
So WAN accelerators, what those do is those typically cache an operating system. And what I mean by that, let's say you have 5 servers that are using Windows 2016. Obviously, you don't need to send Windows 2016 to us 5 times. So what it will do is during that first initial transfer, it will cache the operating system. So each Windows operating system requires 10 gigs. So if you use Windows 2016, Windows 2019, Windows 2012 R2, it will require 30 gigs, one for each of those operating systems. So if you are using Linux, Linux requires 10 gigs for all their flavor. So if you use Ubuntu, Fedora, that would require 10 gigs, and then it would cache that data so that it doesn't have to resend it over and over again.
That's really cool when you think about saving not only time for backups, but storage, because we know there's a cost associated with storage. I'm going to skip application aware just a second and go to change block tracking here. because it sort of applies to the whole deduplication and compression thing. So only blocks of data that have changed. How does that work and what does it do for us?
So every time the backup runs, it actually creates a change block tracking, a CBT log, and it automatically detects any blocks that have changed, so it does not copy any duplicate or unused blocks over to the global data vault side. What that means to everybody is if you have data that changes or a file on a block, it will only copy that block. Any unnecessary blocks that have not changed will not be copied to the global data vault side, or locally, which will reduce the overall time of the backup.
That's cool. Go ahead and wrap us up here on this one with the application aware, if you would.
So application aware, what that does is that creates a transactionally consistent backup, basically of servers that run VSS aware applications. What that means to a non-technical person is if you're running SQL Exchange, anything that processes VSS, we can create an application consistent or a QS version of the database. And a QS version of the database is very important for these VSS aware applications because sometimes we'll see that if they're not QS, they'll come up in an invalid state or an unstable state. And then that would cause issues with the database and you'd have to run queries to fix it or fix these stuff like that. So application aware is very important if it is available, which it is available on domain controller, SQL Server, SharePoint, Oracle databases, PCs, domain controllers, stuff like that.
Yeah, and the opposite of that is the other side of that would be crash consistent, which is, I guess, the least best. That's the least that you could accept, right? So it's equivalent to like pulling the power out of your computer and it just shuts off. That would be crash consistent. Application consistent is.
Yeah, crash consistent is, it is a graceful shutdown of the database, but it is still a usable database at that point. We like to get the application aware the VSS runs, but crash consistent will still work.
Yep. All right. Here's our favorite term of the day, or at least one of the most populars, and that's Cloud Connect. A big buzzword or buzz phrase out there about what Veeam does. But we're going to tell you about what Veeam Cloud Connect is, how it works, and the fact that it's included with the product. It's built into every product. Every version of Veeam Backup and Replication might be a surprise to some. So, Stephen, let's run down through what Cloud Connect is and how it works for us.
What Cloud Connect is we hear a lot here at Global Data Vault about I want to get that Cloud Connect, or my Cloud Connect isn't working, or how much does Cloud Connect cost? So Cloud Connect is actually a protocol that provides the connection between the tenant and the Veeam console on the provider side. So what it is it's a transport path. And basically what that does is it sends data over TCP port 6180 to a cloud gateway on the Global Data Vault side. So all of our Cloud Connect servers here at Global Data Vault actually have a gateway attached to them that is basically the entry point into the Cloud Connect server. And behind that gateway, every customer is going to have a Cloud Connect repository. And what the Cloud Connect repository is it's a repository on the Global Data Vault side where the customer or tenant stores their data. So every single Cloud Connect repository is going to have a cloud tenant associated to it, which we would provide you with username and credentials to connect in. And then after you connect in, you can actually see the cloud repository and how much storage is actually allocated to it. So if you actually go into your backup infrastructure under backup repositories, you will see a cloud repository and it should give you the total space available on how much you're using.
That's pretty handy. Well, with Cloud Connect, we're going to need to be able to do restores and recoveries, right? That's going to be on our next slide. So instant recovery, incremental snapshots, right? These are sort of all commonplace terms now. Instant recovery might be the unique one to Veeam since they pioneered the technology years and years ago. And some of these other ones are pretty common. Tell us about how instant recovery works and maybe a little bit how it works on the Global Data Vault side.
An instant recovery, what that does is on the Global Data Vault side, whenever you call us and say, hey, my site just went down. So what Global Data Vault's going to do is they're going to initiate an instant recovery. And what that does is that actually lets us bring your server up in a low RTO. So normally instant recoveries come up in 15 minutes. And then what it does is it actually writes your files. What I mean by files, your VMDKs, VMX files, it writes them to a vPower NFS data store on the actual server that we build the instant recovery from. And then what that does is that injects a data store into your hypervisor to allow the VM to come up immediately instead of waiting 4 hours for it to restore back into production. It's a method that we use to bring them up immediately into a usable state without needing to restore the files.
And that backup file is sitting there in a deduplicated, compressed, and format, right? So we're saving time. You're still getting all those space savings and all of that, but that instant recovery is just that. You don't have to restore it first. Bam, it's up and running.
That is correct. It is stored and it is pulled from a deduped and compressed copy on the Global Data Vault side. And that is also done behind the scenes where the customer doesn't see it, but it is brought up from that compressed and deduplicated data.
All right. Tell us a little bit about how the backup chain works. And, you've talked about snapshots and whatever. Since we talked about instant recovery, let's go a little bit through file level restores as well, because they're the most basic, but sometimes we forget that they're also the most common.
Yeah, so the file level restores, this is the most common call we actually get at Global Data Vault in our support team. Somebody accidentally deleted a file or they want to compare two files. We have the option to actually restore any file from a server built in by default. So we would actually do a guest level file restore. And then we always choose the option to keep at Global Data Vault. Now, the reason why we always choose the option, you do have three options. You have the option to overwrite, keep, and to restore to another location. So we always choose the option to keep. And the reason for that is because if the file does not exist, it will automatically create that file if you choose keep. If the file does exist and it already detects a file with the same name, it will automatically put the word restored in front of the file or the folder name. And the reason why we choose keep is if we don't want to accidentally override any files. So we'll choose keep. If it doesn't exist, it will put it there. If it does exist, it will put the word restored in front of any file or folder.
What about entire virtual machine level restores?
So entire VM level restore, this is actually a slower process. And the reason for that is if you have a non-critical server that does not require to be up immediately, normally we create tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 jobs. So let's say you have a tier 3 job, non-critical server, nobody uses it. An entire VM level restore will allow us to restore the VM back to the original location or to a different location from the deduped and compressed data. And it does take a while to copy the data over. So we're going to use this option for your non-critical virtual machine.
Now, this slide is all about internal testing, and we've been talking about more of the well-known features, the most common features. This happens to be some of my favorite stuff. As we mentioned, Veeam pioneered the instant recovery, that powering onto the virtual machine without having to restore it. They also give you the ability to do a lot of testing, and we strongly encourage people utilize these as appropriate for you guys because it's all included in the product. So Veeam has some ways to create sandboxes and virtual labs. Stephen, describe us how these work and what kind of testing we can do on those and how it's beneficial for end users.
So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap these all into one. So sure backup, sure replication. What that is that's actually a job that will actually run from your backups. And what it does is it'll allow you to basically run the job that will actually heartbeat application and ping your servers to verify the servers will come up. They'll be able to perform application tests. You can actually go in and specify specific ports if you want to test certain applications. Maybe you're running a special SQL server that doesn't use the standard port. You can actually go in and configure for the application testing to test for that port. So what it does is it powers on the VM from the backup file or the replica, and it actually does the heartbeat, the application, and ping test. Once those three pass successfully, it will automatically complete and spit you out a report letting you know it was successful. If anything fails, it will automatically shut it down. So a virtual lab, what that is that's actually an isolated network, or we're going to use the word sandbox here. What that does is, let's say that you have a server you want to test a patch on. What you can do is you can boot up the server and use a virtual lab to isolate it off your production network. And then what you can do is you can actually enable network masquerading. So it's when you spin up a virtual lab, it is not going to use your same IP range that you use internally. It will be an octet different. So what a network masquerading is, it's a real production IP on the customer side that connects into a fake IP into the virtual lab that allows the customer to access the VM from the production network without causing a DNS or IP conflict.
Yeah, that'd be bad.
Yes.
Yeah, this is always one of my favorite things, just because simply, people don't always keep the same. They don't always use lab environments, first of all, or dev test for budgetary reasons or maintaining similar versions. Keeping the same hardware can be difficult. So you never really know how the test is going to respond. But with virtual machines in these virtual labs, you can test whatever you want based on a backup you took 5 minutes ago if you want. So you get risk reduction in that essence. Let's say you're testing a new version of the application your company uses. What better way to test the running system? You can do that all with the protection of knowing that you're not impacting anything. And it also doesn't change your backup file. So anytime you're poking around in there, applying patches or upgrades or anything like that, you're not impacting your backup file because this lab is created as read only. Once you're finished with it, it just goes away and goes back to being a backup file. Why I love it. All right. Any other words that you think of here, Stephen? Did we miss anything?
No, I think we've covered everything from the basic component and features. So I think we have covered everything.
Cool. Well, as always, if we miss something, you can put it in chat. You can email us, hit us up on social, something like that. We weren't intending this to be really deep, just a little bit of a high level, maybe get rid of some of the confusion or demystify some of that Veeam vocabulary. At Global Data Vault, Veeam is all we do. We're a fully managed service. We do backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, or anything Veeam supports, which is VMware Hyper-V, Nutanix's hypervisor, which is Acropolis, physical servers and endpoints. We also do some pretty cool things with ransomware. We've talked about that a lot, ransomware protection. So with that, I will turn it back over to Trista.
Okay, we have a couple of questions that were in chat, and
Cool.
I'm going to go backwards chronological order. So the last question that came in was the more recent slide. And the question is Sure Backup performed on the local side or remote?
Sure Backup is actually performed on the local side. We do not have the option on the Cloud Connect side to perform it. We test your data on the remote side by doing instant recoveries to verify functionality of the data. But the Sure Backup is local to the customer's LD Veeam backup or replication server.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question is, does Cloud Connect validate data before transmission, like a health check?
By default, yes. Veeam does automatically do a health check. Each job run, Veeam will automatically detect the metadata to determine if the metadata matches. And if it does not, it will flag the data. So Global Data Vault, by default, we automatically run a health check in our standard configuration every single month on the last Saturday of each month. And what that does is that does a thorough deep dive into the data, and it compares all the metadata versus the checksums to make sure that you have a good chain. And that is automatically done at the end of the month by our standard configuration. But to answer the question, yes, Veeam does do a mini health check at the beginning of each job run for all jobs.
To be clear here, it's not Cloud Connect that does that. It's the Veeam process, the backup job itself, right?
Correct. That is every single backup job, whether it be a backup copy or a main backup job, will perform that mini health check at the beginning of each job run.
Okay, fantastic. I don't have any other questions for you, so thank you so much, both Stephen and Kelly. I think we're feeling a little Veeam smarter now after that. I appreciate you walking us through the Veeam vocabulary. So if you are tuning in and you liked this, I hope that you'll subscribe and be on the lookout for our next webinar. So in October, we're going to talk about free backup tools. So again, you can find the replay of this on Facebook, YouTube, and on our website at globaldatavault.com/webinars. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.